Jewish Institute of Religion in the Rabbinate, the Cantorate Jewish Education and Jewish Communal Service.
Thank you. The Liesl M. Blockstein Memorial Lecture, let me just pick a button there, honors a Wisconsin woman involved in politics, academics, the arts, and/or cultural and social affairs to address our community. The lecture has become a joint program of the Jewish Social Services and Temple Beth El, and we acknowledge and thank our partners, Carousel Baird, President, and Dawn Bernay, Executive Director of the Jewish Social Service Agency, along with Steve Lipton, who is the President of Temple Beth El. Also today, I want to mention is present today is Marge Suttonen, a longtime friend of the Blockstein family. And I think that David Blockstein and his wife, Deborah Pribola, are with us. And I'm not sure if Sue and Mike are with us as well, but we're so glad to have everyone here today joining us for this presentation. I now would like to invite Alan Schwartzstein, who is a member of Temple Beth El. Are you a former member of the Dane County Public Health Board? A former member of the Dane County Public Health Board, as well as a physician in our community, to introduce Janel Heinrich.
Good morning. Thank you, Rabbi and Dawn. It's a pleasure for me to introduce our guest today. As Rabbi said, I worked with Janel when I served on the Board of Health for Madison, Dane County about 10, 12 years ago. Janel Heinrich, Masters of Public Health, Masters of Arts, is the Director of Public Health, Madison and Dane County in Madison, Wisconsin, the second largest local health department in Wisconsin. She is a past president of the Wisconsin Association of Local Health Departments and Boards and a current board member. For more than 20 years, Janel has built her career on understanding and addressing the social determinants of health in a variety of public health roles and settings. With Public Health Madison-Dane County for the past 13 years, she has been working to transform the health department to build capacity to eliminate health and racial inequities by addressing the social conditions and systemic racism and inequities that influence health outcomes. Before joining the Public Health Department, Janel worked in academic public health in Chicago and San Diego, has worked in a large federally qualified health center on the US-Mexico border, and volunteered as a medical interpreter in Chicago. A graduate of UW, Janel has a master's degree in public health and a master's in Latin American studies from San Diego State University, and has completed coursework in the pursuit of a PhD in public health from the University of Illinois at Chicago. Janel reminded me to share with you that she has 2 children and 2 dogs, and I won't hesitate any further before asking Janel to come up and speak.
Thank you. Yes, I appreciate that introduction. I'm just honored to be asked to speak with you today and to share some of my story and my vision for public health. So thank you so much for the recognition and calling out that I am more than my degrees and my title, and a little bit about who I am. So I'm going to share my screen. Is that okay, Rabbi?
Yes, of course.
Ready? Okay, let's get this set up. Hope it works the second time around. So my name is Janel. I use the pronouns she, her, and hers. I'm really happy to be here. I am going to do something. Oh, let's see. Oh, okay. Just making sure it's advancing appropriately. Second slide's up there. We're all good. Okay, I will stop with my tech panic making after now. I'm going to start by doing something a little new for me, or maybe less new and more uncomfortable. I'm not a TED talker. That's not my style of delivery. And one of the things I like to do the least is talk about me. But so I appreciate you pushing my my uncomfortability and my vulnerability in that space. So this is a picture of me, and I don't look super happy here, and my grandma, my dad's mother. She died when I was 22. We weren't exceptionally close, but we spent time together regularly. Part of what made it hard to be close to her was that my grandmother was a very private and very proud person. And when I say I don't like talking about myself, she liked it even less, and you'll hear more about that in a moment. But her life, her decisions, and her experiences really left a mark on me that I continue to learn from, and are really part of what drives me forward in my that center drives me forward in my work and center my work in public health. But I also want to be really clear that my grandmother's story and experiences are not mine. And my knowledge of her is also lacking a bit of information about what her story is, which is what also makes it really important to me to share. So here is a picture of my grandmother's birth certificate. We found it after she died, and missing in that top left corner, there's a huge chunk that was torn out. And it's any information that is tied to her racial or ethnic identity. So what we can see here was her full name, where she was born, who her parents were. This confirmed the date that she was born, because that was always a secret too. We never knew. There was a year or two of discrepancy that she would always share with us. Was she younger? Was she older? It was part of grandma. So here is a copy of the birth certificate my parents found when they went up north in Wisconsin, right? So for those of you who are from Wisconsin, cross that that line up there. And they went up north to try to create a more complete understanding of our family tree. And what you can see here, if you can look closely, is that it indicates that my grandmother was half Indian. She was born in northern Wisconsin, near the Bad River reservation, not on the reservation, which was part of the story that we had to continue to unpack as we learned more about her. She was a member of the Ojibwa Nation, the daughter of Josephine and Carl, and she went to primary and middle school at a Catholic boarding school in Odana, Wisconsin, in the 20s and 30s. So that's a story that I can tell myself a lot about, given what we know to be true about the history of our country at that time. She completed high school, we believe, in Milwaukee, but we know virtually nothing of her experiences before she came to Milwaukee. So ever since I was really little, it really bothered me that she wouldn't let us in, that she wouldn't share stories about her upbringing with us. And I had so many questions. As part of my educational and academic training, I really am a believer in qualitative methodology. I probably annoyed my grandma completely when I was younger because I always wanted to know more. I was always trying to ask those questions. That was cultural anthropology, just history was so important to me. But she didn't answer them. I thought it was really cool at the time that she was Indian. And I couldn't understand when I was younger why she was so uncomfortable talking about it. But let me be clear, she was really, really, really uncomfortable. And she would switch the subject. She would respond with a really snappy, "Why do you want to know?" response, and then move on, and as if the question was never asked in the first place. So we never learned much about her about her upbringing from her. And it's really been hard to learn more since. She has a sister who's still living, who's 99 and lives in California. I think she just turned 99 this past week. I forgot to ask my dad if he wished her a happy birthday. That I got to know when I was living in California, and I didn't get to know much about her upbringing from her either, but I had the opportunity to actually meet her. But the only thing I have left about my grandmother, about her origin story, is basically in front of you. And my memories of her. She was an adventurer and a notoriously horrific driver. She learned how to drive later in life, and we lived on a long, not so long, but we lived kind of out in the country with a longer driveway, and she would pull about 4 feet in and she could still never get back out. So I have that memory of her as well. She was an adventure seeker and all those things. And then wild rice. Wild rice is native to the Great Lakes region and is considered to be a very sacred component of the culture of the Ojibwa people. But ironically, it is one of our family's cultural traditions to eat wild rice at Thanksgiving. So I'll leave you with that. I forgot to take out all these, sorry about that. So as I was preparing to talk to you today, and having the opportunity to think about not just about the pandemic, but back to my vision for the future of public health and the priorities for my organization, it really allowed me to connect back to my why. And my grandma's stories and her experiences are really central to it all. And she would be super horrified that I was talking about her. And then probably strangely, really, really proud and want to be talked more about. I've recently been following the work of Project Linked Fate. Has anyone heard of them? So they are a great organization affiliated with folks at the university, at the Haas Institute at UC Berkeley, the California Endowment, and other thought leaders working in the intersection of racial equity and social justice with the goal of breaking the cycle of othering and disrupting the current system we live in to achieve better outcomes for all. And this, they use this image to describe this ideal state where the circle of human concern includes those who are considered full members of society and who can rightfully demand concern and fully expect full regard in return. And so those groups that society recognizes as belonging, we should all be in that circle, I believe. I'm guessing you might share that as well. But when I think back to the beginning of my training in public health, we really focused on the differences. We focused 25 years ago, as I was hearing my bio be, every time I have to update that, we add one more year or one more, and we'll go, but 25 years ago, the focus on health and the language that we used was really related to those disparities, health differences. But it always seemed really insufficient to me when I was trying to really understand my why. And so it was just at the beginning of that shift in public health, I would say, from disparities to health and racial equity, and using different language to not just focuses on differences, but like, what are the things that are driving those differences? The place where I look at the way that I approach that is to create a space where everybody has the opportunity to attain his, her, their full potential, and that where no one is disadvantaged from achieving this potential because of social position or other socially determined circumstances. So applying this circle of human concern, would you like me to pause? Okay. Applying the circle of human concern to public health and the pursuit of health equity means that we need to focus on the systems and structures that have created the health outcomes, the health inequities that we have. And so my approach, as you might not be surprised to hear, really acknowledges that not everyone has been afforded the opportunity to be in that circle. And it must mean that we must acknowledge that the US was created by white men, white Englishmen, for white men. And it was a really small circle of belonging. So I believe that in public health, if we want to dismantle health inequities, we need to create a community or a society where everyone has the opportunity to achieve their full potential. We really have to lean into our discomfort individually, our discomfort within our role as a governmental health agency, and then in creating, supporting, and disrupting those structures. So with that, we have to acknowledge that belonging is created. The laws and practices that we were founded on have pushed people or groups in or out of this circle of concern. And those practices still influence how we are structured today and how we relate to each other today. And so as I come to reflect upon my grandmother's story, I've come to realize that she had to create her own belonging by rejecting the roots and the places that she came from. After she left northern Wisconsin, she moved to Milwaukee, where my great-grandmother was already living, and built her life and identity there as a white woman, which is why we imagine that she tore out that chunk of her birth certificate, though we'll never know for certain, just as we only found out how old she actually was after she died. And it's super unfortunate to me that in order to belong someplace within that circle, things have to be lost. That had to be lost for her. And I believe that no one should ever have to reject or deny who they are or where they come from in order to access opportunity that others are afforded with no question based on what they look like or how they identify. And so we really need to think about those laws and practices that regulate belonging by protecting those who are in power and keeping others from power. Oh, so just as belonging was created, so was the practice of exclusion. And we know that exclusion in public health and pretty much anywhere is the practice of othering by creating or insisting on differences that keep people out of groups or in groups inside the circle of human concern. And this is where we see these disparities in health outcomes and health inequities come up. And so exclusion is created by those laws, the interpersonal and institutional practices such as preferential treatment, prejudice, discrimination, intimidation, vigilante violence, state-sponsored violence to create exclusion. The list goes on and on of the ways that we have seen exclusion be created. I don't know if anyone knows the history of sundown towns. So I was just learning this later and more recently as well. So one of the very kind of sunset or gray towns are communities where certain groups of people were not allowed to be in these communities after the sun went down. And the Midwest was one of those places where there was one of the greater proliferations of these communities up until just as recently as the 1940s, where folks who were African-American, Jewish, Chinese, Mexican were not allowed to be present, which meant that they couldn't live there, right? And so we were creating these ways to keep people out. I was surprised to hear that. And in that way, in that frame, I mean, we know that laws keep people in or out, but just that sunset town perspective and how there were over 100 of them in Wisconsin and over 300 of them in Illinois, just as one reference point. So, and not too long ago. So, let me just make sure this whole thing loads. So one of the most obvious ways of othering we experience in the US is racism, a clear system of structuring opportunity and assigning value to someone based on the way they look. We've seen this play out time and time again over the course of our history, rewriting definitions of race, a social political construct with no legitimate biological basis to keep people in or out of access to wealth.
Don't know where that's at.
I'm going to pause.
Okay. Let's mute to the television. down. Yeah. Let's see what your words are having.
It just turned it all on. It's when I hear myself that I say, oh my goodness, I'm sorry that what you have to hear my voice. So you hear yourself differently on camera. Right? All right, are we good? Okay. So, you know, racism's a practice of exclusion. We've created it. It's a social political construct. And we need to acknowledge that, how it's advantaged or disadvantaged folks, and all the different dimensions of it. Which all have a powerful, powerful effect on health. Biologically, directly, cumulatively. We know that all these dimensions adding up for folks who are experiencing racism are now in a place where we have science and evidence that can tell us that it's having an impact on genes. It's having an impact on people's health over the course of generations because of that cumulative stress of the systems that we've created. And I think that this is a reason to care about race as we think about health, but it also supports the intersectionality of where folks have been kept in or kept out. So I'm not going to spend time going through all these different dimensions. I don't want to, that's not part of my lecture today, but I think in order to really lean into race as a centering piece of what drives us forward in public health, we have to really lean into our discomfort with all these different elements of racism and how they interplay with each other. And how they really accumulate in structural racism. Where the intersection of power across institutions and society comes into play to disadvantage people of color while privileging white folks. And in that place, I want to lean into, it's important to just to ask for folks to recognize that the interplay, it's not about any one person as a racist actor, but our inability to, or what we haven't leaned into, our discomfort to disrupt that, so that all those different elements accumulate and work together in ways that impact, you know, without questioning the impact of structural racism on the supports and permission that continue to play out in ways of segregation of resources and risks, which create group advantages or disadvantages, which allows for differential valuation in human life by race, and it limits the self-determination of certain groups of people. I think I might have a slide out of order here, but we're just going to go there. If you don't mind me, I'm just going to make sure I have that one. That's right. So I hope that I've explained to you why I believe that we should lead with race in public health. But I also, have you heard of Human Impact Partners? Does anyone? They're another great nonprofit and out in California, also affiliated with the California Endowment, the Haas Institute. And I think I agree with Jonathan Heller, who is the former co-director of Human Impact Partners, in this statement that we should lead explicitly, though not exclusively, with race, because racial inequities persist in every system across the country without exception. We cannot find one example of a system where there are no racial disparities in health, in outcomes, health, education, criminal justice, employment, and so on. They are so baked into the creation and ongoing policies of our government, of media, and other institutions that, unless otherwise countered, racism operates at individual, institutional, and structural levels and is therefore present in every system we examine. So my vision for the future of public health, I apologize, is focused on disrupting structural racism in order to decrease health inequities. I believe that we in public health are uniquely qualified to lead this work as we understand the factors that influence health outcomes and are largely outside of the walls of healthcare and are where the confluence of different systems intersect that support or limit access on opportunity, and therefore we should work on disrupting structural racism. But I also know that in order to do that, we really need to work on individual and institutional racism. I believe that we all have a responsibility to act. I believe that government should be part of acting, and I believe that public health should lead this. So it leads up to my vision for public health is health and racial equity as my North Star. I believe that good health is a right, not a privilege. And I also recognize those individual systems and structures that have been created, as I've said routinely this morning, to keep privilege in the hands of some and outside of the hands of others. So rather than maintaining, you might ask, what do we do? What does this mean for my organization? And some of this is a bit more aspirational than where we have had the opportunity to achieve all of the goals in these categories. But rather than maintaining structures that separate people from societal resources or limit access to those resources, we need to redesign our structures to build opportunity and to connect people to the supports that they need to thrive. And by considering the challenges that different groups face, we're able to build healthier structures, and healthier, stronger structures bring benefit to everyone. So in public health, my way to approach this for our organization is to focus on these 5 priorities: prioritizing community voice to shift power, advancing racially, socially, and environmentally equitable policies that improve health, increasing transparency and accessibility of data and public information, addressing the root causes to improve and sustain social, emotional, and physical well-being, and build relationships and maximize partnerships to improve health. We've been working on this at PHMDC for more than 10 years, which, if you ask different folks in our organization, might say it's been too long, it's not long enough, we should have done more. But as we can all acknowledge, the history that we have that we need and the systems that we need to disrupt, progress is slow. Changing government is hard, but it is very important to do. So you might ask what it means. What's the definition? What are we doing in these places? When I say prioritize community voice to shift power, it means shifting power to those with the least power, both within, across, and within the organization, to create an environment that fosters effective and legitimate solutions. And by power, I mean the ability to make decisions and to be part of decisions that are crucial for a specific outcome to achieve better health outcomes. So what we are really trying to do is to move from the default of concentrating power at higher levels of government and organizations towards enabling communities and people to formulate solutions and make decisions on their own or in partnership with us. For our organization, we have examples of this where we have developed community grassroots steering committees for different areas of work. We have a steering committee, a community advisory board made up of all graduates of our Nurse Family Partnership Program. And we meet with these group of moms and take to them things that we would like to ask for their input and how to improve the delivery of services that we offer in that program. And they are shaping what we do. We would like to aspirational, a goal would be to have more regular customer service surveys. And it may sound very transactional, but by doing that well, it will help us inform if we're actually meeting the mark in the services that we provide. As always, there's the engagement of stakeholders in the legislative process. Show up, tell us what you want or need, come to our Board of Health, be present, let's hear your voice. Things that I think the pandemic has supported is the ability for people to participate in different ways, just given the moving to a virtual platform. A lot of folks haven't been able to come downtown at a specific period of time, and it might be easier for them to be able to share their thoughts and opinions with us and in this virtual platform. So it is something that not just the health department, but the city and county are considering of how to continue, and when meetings are held and where they are held in person. When we talk about advancing racially, socially, and environmentally equitable policies that improve health, I'm talking about both big P policy and little p policy, right? So big P laws and rules that are promulgated by government, by different bigger systems. And I'm also talking about the things that we can do within our organizations that create change. And something that I have an aspirational, and I'm not alone in my organization, goal for is to have a legislative agenda for our department to work with our Board of Health. And I keep looking over here at you, Dr. Schwartzstein, when I'm mentioning that as our former board president, to have that focus on those upstream social determinants and really to think about direct or indirect advocacy in those places. To build awareness of the connection between social issues and health with different audiences, to undertake direct and indirect advocacy in decision-making contexts, like letting our voice be lent to different places to help educate around the impact of those policies on health, are just some examples. To increase transparency and accessibility of data and public health information. One, it really starts by deaggregating data by race, ethnicity, gender, neighborhood, and in so many ways to make information meaningful and accessible so that it can be used not just by us in the health department, but that we can provide it back to folks in the community so that they can have access to data to then shape their programming, to then inform their approach to policy. We are creating community level data profiles that show opportunities and challenges. And we are really working to take a mixed methods approach. When I go back to my earlier public health days in that research vein, to not just look at the hard data, but to bring in community voice so that it can be paired and help build the story and shape the narrative of the data so that it can be more useful. When we talk about addressing root causes to improve and sustain social and emotional well-being for all, I'm talking about the social determinants of health. Tying those social determinants to health outcomes, and then what can we do on a daily basis, starting to use universal health screeners or universal social determinant screeners when we're engaging with clients to better understand the context that brings them into our working with them with regard to their levels of food or housing insecurity or security, and then to be able to connect folks better to the resources that will help support achieving better health outcomes for all. And then finally, to build relationships and maximize partnerships to improve health. We can't do this alone. We in government have a history of making decisions for others without really consulting with folks. And we need to engage with people and identify, build relationships, build trust with community and partnerships so that we can actually lean into decision-making and to improvements better together. So you might ask, I'm going to transition. This is going to be a little clunky transition, right? Of like, what does this mean in the COVID times? Even with all of this approach, we know that COVID has exacerbated health inequities in the United States significantly. We've been trying to change them. We're probably going to have to double down even more than we were before. Unfortunately, it's been a difficult time of year. I feel like it's been a year. It's been a difficult couple years for everyone. I think it's been especially hard for under-resourced populations who are seeing more social and economic effects. BIPOC folks are seeing more social and economic effects of the pandemic than white folks. Black and Latino individuals in the US are dying from COVID-19 at higher rates than white people, and the root causes are still there. And we really need to double down on those in the next couple of years. I mean, forever, but to get to different outcomes. So putting all of that into practice, I'm going to share some data. We are, thank you for everyone's support in this room and online who live here. We're the most vaccinated county in Wisconsin. It's amazing. It's so great. But we're still seeing inequities in outcomes. So when you take all of this to COVID, for Latinx people, their rate of illness is 2.1 times the rate among non-Latinx folks. The rate among American Indian, Alaskan Natives is 2.6 times the rate among white people. The rate among Black people is 2 times the rate among white people. And the percentage, you can tell me to stop, but I love rattling off some data. So this percentage of Black people with COVID who are hospitalized is 3.5% compared to 2.2% of whites who become ill, who end up hospitalized. And breaking that down is something that we should all be proud of here. Nevertheless, though, we're having these outcomes. And when we compare the work that we've done as a community together, applying these values and these priorities to how we do work, when we look at vaccine status, we're doing a lot better, but we're still not having significantly better outcomes. In Wisconsin, 47.9% of American Indians are vaccinated. In Dane County, 95%. In Wisconsin, 64.8% of Asians, folks who identify as Asian, are vaccinated. This is just one dose. I just am using the first dose as the grounding element. So 73.3% in Dane County, 41.9% of people who identify as Black. In Wisconsin, 54.3%. In Dane County, 58% of all white folks in the state, 75% here, 75% here in Dane County. And 55.8% of those who identify as Hispanic are vaccinated with 1 dose in Wisconsin and 79% in Dane County. And I share that because we've tried to apply some of these priorities, some of these principles to how we've done parts of our work in the last couple years to address the inequities that we knew to be true before and that we saw playing out over the pandemic. I'm going to give you a bit of a laundry list, and then I'll talk about a few things that we've done more specifically. We knew that we needed to make services available to people where they were in different places, provided by trusted partners. So we organized testing pop-ups, mobile vaccine clinics, and we prioritized places with lower vaccine rates or lower access to different services. We created a community engagement team, which is something that we had wanted to do pre-pandemic, but we're able to move in different ways during the pandemic to get up and running, of folks who represented the community, who came to us to be able to work with us to then share their experiences and their information back with the community members that with their community. So to support answering a lot of questions around COVID about vaccine in both English and Spanish, we've partnered with many community organizations since, I wouldn't say quite the beginning, or probably the beginning, but that had different ways of being applied to make information available, to make services available. We've provided masks. And what we've really tried to center everything around is framing data so that it could help inform making good decisions. This is a group of folks. I am not actually sure where they are. Well, it looks like they're at the Allied Wellness Center. Where we, members of our community engagement team who went out and worked with the community. This community engagement team held 57 vaccine community engagement sessions in 2021. 25% of those were in Spanish. They were held with so many different sector partners, social services, government, schools, faith organizations, different community organizations, and they worked with 72 people or groups to share resources, connect people, and also were present on 12 different radio shows on the Latino radio in 2021. We, as I mentioned, we use data to then prioritize where we should be hosting different vaccine clinics. And we looked at vaccine data by census tract, and then started to really work with different folks who are trusted people in those communities to see if they would be willing to partner with us to make vaccine available in their spaces. We've had hundreds of vaccine clinics all over the county since then. We started in spring of 2021. Just since the beginning of 2022 so far, I think, what are we, the 13th of February today, we've held over 75 mobile vaccine clinics. And all in all, and this is not in the mobile, just in the mobile vaccine space, but our organization is proud to say that we've given probably more than 100,000 vaccines in this community. And a smaller percentage of those in the mobile way, but we also know that that's not where we had intended to provide the majority of those vaccines. So I would say that most of the work that we have been focusing on during the pandemic has been largely at, I would call maybe the surface level, but I am so incredibly grateful for the recognition in this community that and in the both units of government that I represent and work for, that the root causes have needed a lot of attention outside of the work that's happening in the health department. Many millions of dollars were provided through the funding that the city and the county government received from the federal government to go back out into the community towards root causes, focusing on housing, transportation, economic stability, childcare, and many, many other things. So what can you do? And I'm thinking you all probably do a lot already, or you wouldn't be here. But my ask for you would be to lean into your journey, lean into your personal journey, lean into your own learnings, lean into the discomfort of I think it's always uncomfortable when we lean into the history of race and what that means for us. Take courses, read books, watch videos, educate yourselves on critical issues. There's a lot of really, really great local resources here in this community to support that individual learning. We've got the Nehemiah's Black History course. The YWCA, if you haven't been to their Racial Justice Summit, please go. It's transformative. You can donate your money and time to people working on these efforts, especially communities of color. And then you can take all of that and advocate for changes in your own space, here in your congregation, in your workplace, at your school. Take these issues to your spaces and think about what you can do in both the little p and the big P ways, and the ways that you interact with others. And then please consider advocating and for or against policies in support of public health. And that can range from anything from taking stances against or banning critical race theory to be discussed in different places, for raising the for raising the minimum wage, for promoting affordable healthcare, housing, transportation, and the list goes on. So with that, I went even longer than I thought I might have been able to do. Thank you for inviting me to be with you in this space, share some of my story, share a bit of my vision and my grounding in the way that we approach public health. I am grateful to be able to represent our organization and lead this work. And I learn from my folks, my team every day in this way, in this space together. So our work is never finished. Our work is going to be harder as we continue to exit the pandemic than it was pre-pandemic for all the reasons that I've discussed today. And thank you so much.
Janelle, thank you very much. I want to, first of all, understand and recognize that your expertise and your experience in public health is certainly evident, and your passion is certainly here with us today. It is, the rabbis of the Talmud said that one should not live in a community if there's not adequate health care there. And they were very adamant about that because so concerned they were about making sure that everyone had adequate access to and positive results from their health care. So we have two congregations here that are beginning to raise some questions. And I think we'll take questions alternately from those people here in the community, here in Bethel in this room today, and from those people online. We have had a little bit of a sound gremlin today, so I'm sorry. We were hoping to get people's voices online, but I think that that may not be easy. So I just don't want to take any chances and spend time troubleshooting. So let me ask first, for those in the room, if you have a first question, otherwise I'll go to the people online who have been bringing questions here with us. Okay, let's go to Alan, go ahead.
So Janelle, thank you very much for this.
I think you may want to speak a little bit loud, just to make sure that they hear you online.
Is this better, Rabbi?
Can you all hear him online? Can you hear Alan online? Some people can. Speak loud, yeah.
Thank you very much, Janelle. Appreciate your comments and your work. Since this is a lecture series about women active in the area, could you speak a little about what it's been like to be a woman in your position, and particularly in the last 2 months, which has been very public?
2 months or 2 years?
Oh, 2 years. I'm sorry.
You want me to stop sharing?
Yeah.
Then I can see everyone. That's even better. Great.
There you go.
You know, I would say it has probably been, as a woman in a leadership role, has been a more challenging experience since this pandemic started than I ever experienced previously. And I think, is that part of your question? Just making sure that it's played out in different ways. I never really questioned it as much before the pandemic started, I would say, but there have been ways that in the role being so public, the comments and the approaches to women in leadership have been not always supportive by different members of the community, and that plays out in just the language that's being used against that I've had used with me in my role. So.
A question from someone online, from Art and Jeannie Waldman. Poverty has been shown to be a key determinant of health. What are you doing to address this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I will say, like, I don't have anything concrete to offer as what the health department is currently doing, other than at this point, we are naming it, and naming it as a way that intersects with health outcomes, and then all the things that are creating poverty or creating wealth or keeping people outside of wealth. And that's part of just really calling out those systemic and structural things that generate income. We would love if there were policies that we could promote that would support living wage. That's something that's held at the state level that we don't have the opportunity to influence. We talk about that a lot. So those are things that I ask other folks to lean into, and that call to action is to support different legislation there, so that income can be increased and poverty decreased. But yeah.
David.
Hi, David Gunderson. So, and I think that question is kind of a foundational question, and that, you know, poverty is at the core of so much of this, but we can't solve poverty right now in this moment. We can start working toward it. And I guess I'm wondering, and it also seems kind of overwhelming to even try and do that. I guess I'm wondering, what are the low-hanging fruit, if there are any, in terms of, you know, what is achievable right now or in the near future? I'm a dentist, you know, and I, you know, spent last Thursday night at the Salvation Army from 6 until 9 o'clock pulling teeth, because people were in pain and had teeth rotting in their mouths. And you can't parent, you can't work, you can't teach, you can't do anything if you have teeth rotting in your mouth. But really, the solution to that is not, you know, just having more people pull teeth. It's getting 20 years upstream and getting access for those people when they're kids to dental care. So I guess I'm wondering, you know, in your mind, are there low-hanging fruit that can get us towards some of these solutions? And also, if there are things that we're doing right now that are going to bear those fruits 20 years down the road.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I should have thought of like, what was my list? Because I think this is where it becomes complicated, right? The web is so interconnected with each other. So, you know, there's the transactional things of where we put investment, right? It's focusing on if there are systems that support individuals who are in poverty, and then there are programs that help them get out, let's work on eliminating that cliff, right? The benefits cliff, so that income and wealth can continue to be generated. And that's a policy conversation that we can have and we can try to attack. And I think that that's something that would be very important. There's folks that are working on that here in this community, trying to advocate at the state level. But all of them, I don't know if there is one low-hanging fruit. And I'm not trying to answer your question because I don't know if we have one solution, right? Or what's the right one low-hanging fruit to work on. It's where it just layers in together.
Well, and I would say just really quick, I mean, you showed the data on the vaccination. I mean, I get actually quite angry. I'm a public health person with the fact that what you have done and what we have done is not acknowledged for its successes. Everyone's talking about the controversies and the people that are unhappy about what's happened. Almost 80% of the population getting vaccinated means that those other people that didn't get vaccinated are protected. And public health has been extremely successful from the beginning. They've been right. And so to me, that is a low-hanging fruit. And once again, up and down, all around, no one's perfect. But the reality is the things that have been said from the beginning have been the things that are true: social distancing, masking, get vaccinated. You know, if you're at risk, stay home, or you know, don't expose yourself. I guess I think you have that. That is a fruit already. That's a success, and I wish people would celebrate that. But then also the things you're talking about right now, the relationships and the things you're out in the community. I guess I'm hoping that that's a place to build on. And I don't know what your thoughts are about that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for that recognition. I take that on behalf of all of us who are doing this really hard work and how we have had to make decisions at the policy level using the science that we have, but it gets us to the place that we are today, especially in Dane County. I would say absolutely. You know, the pandemic, building on that last question statement, you know, it allowed us to really lean into relationships in ways we weren't able to do as quickly as we did before. And some of the things that I didn't mention, in addition to who we partnered with and where we hosted clinics, was how we hired. And it changed the way that could bring people into our department into county or city government that then helps support breaking down some of those structural barriers that have kept people in or out of access to wealth and jobs and income, you know. So I'm hopeful that we can continue to parlay some of that into application beyond COVID at the organizational level, with regard to what we look like, who we are, who we represent, how inclusive we are. I recognize that it'll probably be uncomfortable, right, in a very white dominant government structure, and how we have to lean into that discomfort together, which is why I keep going back to like, what can you do at the individual level? What's that institutional level? And then how does that all interplay? And then how that translates into hopefully different outcomes in a variety of different ways, right? And where we might not have to have you pulling teeth at 9 o'clock on a Thursday. I don't know if it was 9 o'clock, but yeah, I bet it was, because we're in a different place from that upstream perspective.
Thank you. I have a comment online, a brief comment from Stu Levitan, who says that he had the honor of serving with Liesl Blockstein on the county board. She would have loved your presentation.
Well, thank you.
So there are people with us today, you know, combining here and online who knew Liesl and who knew her service to this community. And I think that they are implying that you certainly follow in a tremendous line of strong individuals who lead this community. There is a question online that says, what has the COVID experience taught Dane County and Madison about successful approaches to get at the structural issues of race and disparity? What will you be doing differently because of what you have learned? And a great talk.
Thank you.
Comment from David Blockstein.
Well, thank you. You know, to not be redundant, but some of those were what I was sharing earlier. You know, we've leaned into a different way of working with community partners to identify people to hire into our department, and we've been successful in navigating the bureaucracy of government in order to allow that to happen. And there are pathways. We haven't used them as much as perhaps other organizations in government have used them in the past. So that's one way that we hope to keep doing that. The other way is, you know, as what I've mentioned, is just how do we make decisions? Who are we engaged with? And how do we make resources available to folks and information, and recognizing that it's not Public Health Madison Dane County staff, or may not, it should not, I don't want to even say may, are likely not the primary messengers in a lot of different places. And we shouldn't pretend that we should be. And so how do we take our expertise and our power, because of who we are positionally, you know, in this community, in government, in order to shift that to other folks and to lift up their power. We're going to keep doing those things. I gave you a couple quick examples. I didn't even have the opportunity, I apologize, to go through and really itemize where we've done that in other ways, but that's something that we are really proud of, and we also want to do more of, and we hope that that will lead to some longer changes. But we also know it has to happen not just within us. It needs to happen across the community, so that those systems and structures are working well together.
A question from someone in the room? Please, Dawn.
I think the work that's been happening with COVID has been great. And a lot of what's been really, really helpful has been the fact that you've been able to be out in the different communities specifically for COVID vaccines. Is there any possibility of taking some of that and being able to continue to make it easier for people to access some, you know, kinds of healthcare? I mean, dentistry is, you know, a huge one, but mental health, but even some of the basic things that it's just really hard for. I mean, transportation in Dane County kind of sucks if you don't have access to a vehicle. And is there a way to make it easier for people? Is that something you guys have been thinking about at all?
We absolutely think about that with regard to what we have the locus of control over. I will say, and I'm not saying this in a I hope that it doesn't come across in defensive. A couple of the things that you mentioned as examples aren't things that we have the ability to make independent decisions about, but where we really want to work with and are working with people and different partners to help make that happen. So yes, I mean, we are trying to figure out how to do that within our locus of control. I will say some of what could make that hard coming out of the pandemic is just recognizing the fact that during the pandemic, we have grown to a staff of at times up to 400 people. Normally, we're 170 folks. And in order to do some of those things, we'll have to, ideally, we would have more resources and more staff to do it. And I'm not saying this, when I look at how public health departments are funded across the country, a department serving a community the size that we are should probably be about 400 people every day, not just during the pandemic. And that's not a criticism of anything that's happened here. It's just a statement of fact and what's happened in the systems around us and how public health's been funded. So to do some of those things, we have to lean into what worked well. And then we may have to have hard conversations around like those three critical questions of like, what are we doing well? What needs to stay? What might need to go? Or how do we adapt? So absolutely though.
Question from someone online. Stu Levitan asks, it's very comforting to know that wherever I go in Dane County, almost everyone will be masked indoors. If there were no political pressures, how long would you continue the mask mandate?
That's a great question. That's the question of the day.
No pressure.
I can't,
No pressure.
I have had opportunity to speak with Stu in the past, so I am not surprised that he is asking me this question this morning. So, it's really, I would say we're probably getting to the point, quite honestly, that the science is the evidence would indicate it might not need to be here for as long as some people might feel comfortable having it, right? And when you look at the rates of vaccine in this community, they're quite high. When we look at the health outcomes that we've experienced, even during Omicron, I don't know, I'll put in a little plug. If y'all don't follow us, please look at our data snapshots, right? But the headline of the snapshot that was published, or one of the leading takeaway messages was, though we've had a higher case rate during this Omicron surge, and I say to my staff all the time, that's a bit of an apples to bananas comparison. And they're like, what do you mean by apples to bananas? And what I mean by that is because we have been Dane County and we have had so many incredible resources here and people have utilized the resources, we have an actual better sense of what the state of COVID is compared to other counties across the country, or across the state, and maybe across the country. I talk to my colleagues, health officers from across the state, a number of times a week. And there have been places where counties that have had no public testing available for almost the entire pandemic. And so, or people who just don't want to test as much. So that's my apples to bananas, right? But yes, the data says that our surge is bigger. Is it really? Have we had a higher case rate? I don't know if we entirely know. But even with that, we've had a consistently lower percent positivity, which means we're capturing more people who are ill than other communities. And we have experienced significantly lower death rates, which is probably largely attributed to our high vaccine status. So, and fortunately, Omicron does seem to be a less severely impacting variant. So, yeah.
Thank you. Another question from someone in the room, perhaps? Yes, please, in the back.
Things that keep you up at night, vaccine hesitancy. What goes through your mind when you think about someone who perhaps in a rural area or inner city area that represents
part of that 48% that's not getting vaccinated. What goes through your mind about why they're still not getting vaccinated? And what could you say to them if you're sitting down in a coffee shop with them?
Sure. So the question is, what one, I think I hear two questions. Like one, is vaccine hesitancy something that keeps me up at night? And two, what do we do about it?
Oh, and then let me add, because someone just asked online, what do you think accounts for the disparity in vaccination rates across the counties in Wisconsin? So maybe that goes with the question. Yes.
Well,
Thank you, Lynn.
Yeah, thanks for those questions. So I would push back a little bit, or maybe include more places where vaccine hesitancy is present. It's present in my extended family. So those are hard conversations to have, right? I think at different points in the pandemic that kept me up differently. I will say more recently, it doesn't keep me up as much as it does, probably because I've leaned into, we have done so much here in this community. And when I say that, I mean the collective we, and not just Public Health Madison, Dane County. There has just been so many incredible efforts and demonstration of ways that helps hopefully build access to data around the efficacy of vaccine and to help counter some of the myths that people may have about vaccine. And as I've mentioned, it may be us with the science, but somebody else's voice, providing that. Is that happening as much across the state as it is here? Maybe not. And then just how do we make vaccine available to folks is really, I think, part of that key way. We've had, as I mentioned, we've had more than 75 mobile clinics just since the beginning of this year, not to mention the hundreds last year. And we're one of many players in this community that has taken a very, very incredible commitment to making vaccine available, accessible, where people are. So many of our healthcare providers and our community organizations have leaned into that together. So those are some of the things that I think we need to do. And I will say, I think, there's and keep working on. And I think part of it is science has been under fire more, and there may not be as many balancing voices in different communities as there may be here.
Let me take one last comment from someone online who I guess has made a comment, and perhaps you could just comment on it, and that will be the last today. When my dad taught, this is from David Blockstein, when my dad taught a course on introduction to healthcare at UW in the 1970s, he used a book by Victor Fuchs, Who Shall Live? The book emphasized the importance of socioeconomic factors in health outcomes. It also focused on rising costs of healthcare. Despite the Affordable Care Act, it seems that the costs of healthcare are driving many of the disparities.
I would agree with that, and I would add a whole bunch of other things to it. One of the things that our organization, I'm proud to be part of, our organization's part of, is the Dane County Health Council. And the Dane County Health Council is made up, has gone through a pretty big strategic revisioning in the last couple of years. It's made up of the major healthcare providers, including Access Community Health Center, the health department, Madison Metropolitan School District, the United Way. Who am I missing?
ABC for Health?
No longer. We have I think those are the main players right now. And we took the community health assessment data, the community health needs assessment data that the hospitals are required to do, in partnership with the part of the community health assessment that health departments are required to do to identify the places where we're seeing the biggest disparities, health inequities, right? And selected low birth weight and infant mortality as the key priority, and then really leaned into taking a social determinants approach to trying to think of different ways to build solutions. And so, or identify approaches to get to solutions. And, healthcare costs was one of those. But when we think of that from an access perspective, it's just one of the A's that we think about. We think about affordable, accessible, appropriate. And those were all of the things that came up in conversations with community members about what was, and including racist practice within different institutions or by providers, implicitly or explicitly, that people were experiencing in their care, and has resulted, so I would say it's one of the things, but there's all the things that are related to that. And so the work that we're doing in the Health Council are trying to focus on things that we can collectively do at a systems level, at a policy level. All of us are really leaning into trying to undo our racist practices as providers in order to make care be more accessible and appropriate in ways that are meaningful for the folks that we engage with. So yes, and is my short, long answer.
Janel, thank you so much for being with us today. It isn't often when we talk to someone who is responsible really and directly affects the lives of people who are in this room, who are online. We'll see this presentation in the future. And we thank you for your service. We thank you for your dedication to this field. And it's no wonder why you're our Liesl Blockstein recipient this year. And we thank you so much for your time today. Great for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for being with us online. Thank you for being here in person, and wait till next year. And thank you. Have a wonderful day. Stay warm, everyone. They're all clapping online.
Thank you. Can I shut this down?
Yes.